Until recently, I never occurred to me, and maybe I'm just slow on the uptake, but it never really occurred to me how much physical healing is like emotional healing, if you will. And the subtitle for Unscripted, of course, is the collected wisdom of life, living, and sorrow. And sorrow is a subtext for most of our living, really, when it comes right down to it. Is we go through cycles of loss, we go through cycles of joy, and then we have sorrow again because we get invested in it. And so what I want to talk a little bit about, and this has been, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is Dr. Ray Mitsch, the host for the Unscripted podcast. It is, as the name implies, I sit down and reflect on life, living, and sorrow, as I mentioned earlier. And this is the it is the attempt to get back in the swing of things again. I am now officially at week 6 since a knee replacement, and it really is pretty amazing how much of our lives we take for granted. And then you have something like that, like this kind of surgery that I had occur, excuse me, and it brings, I wouldn't say it brings things into focus. If anything, it gives you some sense of pause about how much of our lives we keep well-ordered, well-controlled, and it nothing really ever upsets the apple cart. And that's an overstatement to some degree, I suppose. But at the same time, I think it's important to understand that there is such a parallel between physical healing and emotional healing. And that's what I want to take a little bit of time of your time, which I'm so thankful that you've taken the time to do that. So listen in. Is to reflect on all the parallels and the things that are really ultimately the challenge between physical healing and emotional healing. And one of the things that I want to start out talking about is what is important is what is seen and what is unseen. And the world of sorrow, when we lose somebody, is generally the world of the unseen. And we're probably not going to be walking around with a placard on saying, I lost somebody last week. We're not going to be doing that. And we're going to try to put a good face on it, which is a really good way to put it, a good mask on it to go about our business and do what we have to do. But that doesn't even begin to get at the cost that it costs us to do that, because then when we take the mask off, there's all this energy and all this emotional kind of dynamic that has gone into keeping that mask in place, not raising any kind of concerns from people. And that's good and bad. On the one hand, we can do it too well, and people think, hey, look, they're doing great. They're coming back from it and everything's getting back to quote unquote normal, which, I mean, that phrase in and of itself just annoys the socks off of me, partly because there is no normal after you lose somebody of importance in your lives. There is no normal. They are now gone. And because of that, then I hesitate to say new normal. It's a new way of functioning without the person in our lives, and we really can't get away from it. We can do a lot of things. We do a lot of things that to soften the blow, to dilute the impact of whatever it might be, dilute the impact of the absence that we feel. And that's certainly been a part of the story that prompted me to do this podcast, because the significant loss that I had in March, and now it continues, and we're now March to July, which is 4 months out, and it seems as if everything is back to quote unquote, here it comes, normal, right? But there's nothing normal about the normal we're living in. Nothing, because normal is defined by the time before, not the time that we're in. So what I want to kind of highlight is what is seen and what is unseen, and the importance of those two things. Because in a lot of cases, what is unseen is the very thing that defines our experiences and what goes on. So let me walk you through what I've been through over the last 6 weeks in the physical realm, and then kind of draw it over into the parallels to the emotional realm, because the physical realm is very easy for us. And in my case, I had a jam-packed schedule coming out of graduation, doing all the grading that I did. Then I had a silent retreat, and then 2 days later, I'm on the operating table, and the doc is, as my wife so lovingly says, whacked my leg off. And there is a lot about orthopedics, which is a side note. There's a lot about orthopedics. There's a lot like carpentry. I mean, there's saws and drills and screws and all sorts of crazy stuff, which I have been through before. And there were a fair amount of memories that were coming back from the kind of tragic, pivotal, actually, fall that I had many, many, many years ago off of my roof, and fractured my femur and had all of the very same things, except in that case, I didn't plan on it. This one I planned on. I knew it was coming. And so the surgery occurs, and you're waking up from the whole ordeal, and there's some little doubt in your mind: did it actually happen, or am I still waiting in the recovery room, not in the recovery, but the prep room, to get this thing over with? And indeed, it has already occurred, and it's already over, as evidenced by the fact of this massive bandage that is over my knee that extends a good 6 or 7 inches from the top of my quad at the top of my knee all the way down to below my the tendon that we kneel on, if you will. So you're reminded instantly in the physical realm, and that's the one thing that I want you to pay attention to, is there's a lot about the physical realm that people don't have to figure out if there's anything wrong. They can see the scar. They can see the bandages. They can see your inability to walk very well and all of those things. And what's really, really crazy about knee replacement, this may be more than any of you are bargaining for to know, but what's really crazy about knee surgery is they literally had me up on my feet within hours of the surgery being over. And I'm learning, in a sense, I'm learning to walk, which is kind of odd to say. But there's pain, and of course, coming out of the surgery, they put a lot of pain relievers in the joint and in the bones and everything else. So there's time before it starts waking up, and you lay in bed. And I certainly did. It's like, why in the world did I bargain to do something like this? Surely what I had before isn't as bad as what I had now. But again, always keep in the back of your mind the parallels between the physical and the seen versus the non-physical and the unseen. Because the one thing about that is, when I limp, nobody is surprised. All right, they see the scar. My grandsons come and check on me every now and again, and they look at the scar. I wouldn't say admiring the scar, but it's kind of a remarkable sized scar that I have on my leg, and they're saying, "How is it?" And it's okay. Some days are achy, like today is actually achy. It wasn't all that long before I started sitting down to do this podcast that I had this huge ice pack on my knee, and I propped my leg up to be able to do some other work in preparation for this. So there's a lot about physical injury that's self-validating. It is seen No one doubts the validity of what actually has happened. The interesting thing about internal wounds, whether emotional, whatever realm you want to put it in, whether emotional, psychological, whatever that might be, it is unseen, and to some degree we have to fight. And I don't say this in a derogatory way, but we have to fight for it to be valid because people can't see it. They can't see what we're experiencing in the absence of the person in our lives. And so no one in the physical realm ever doubts the validity of the struggle that you're having to walk. For example, when I first finally went to physical therapy, and my surgeon jokingly refers to them as not physical therapists, as personal terrorists, I could only really bend my knee 72 degrees. I mean, and you can kind of visualize that. And in the work that I've done in terms of the stretching and everything else, the funny thing about it is the stretching is painful. It hurts. I'm grimacing a lot of the time by pulling my heel up to my backside. And it's that lengthening and stretching of the tendons in my knee that makes it possible for me to walk relatively fluidly and get up and down stairs and all that kind of jazz. So in the physical realm, what is seen is self-validating, and it's tangible, and the progress can be seen. It actually can be seen. I am now at about 120 degrees. That's kind of my golden ticket out of PT, and that will just continue all the way through. The swelling still hasn't entirely gone down, so there's this constant reminder that, oops, something happened here. Not that anybody doubts it, because I've got a railroad track of stitches, of sutures from closing up my knee. So the mobility can be seen, the physical healing can be seen. It is not as pronounced as it was when they first started taking it off. But in a lot of cases in the physical realm, there's always a clear ending point. One can return to not normal activities, but typical activities. And the reference point in this case is always important, because the reference point is when I started. And when I started, I could pull my leg up, my right leg, which is the knee that was replaced. I could pull it all the way up to my buttocks, and that was about 130 degrees. They measured it before I went into surgery. So that was already established, and that's the reference point. So in the world of what isn't seen, we don't really pay attention to what the reference point is, what is normal. And in a lot of cases, depending on the person that we've lost, our relationship and how it has gone with them establishes what is normal. And we oftentimes will use that reference point, whether it's healthy or not. We will use that reference point as a judgment of and a conclusion about where we are on the other side of that thing. And so there is no clear ending point with the internal world, the world that is not seen. We hope, and maybe even require, depending on how the relationships go, others to validate the importance of the wound that we had. And in days gone by, particularly in the world of sorrow, in days gone by, whole cultures were very calibrated for people that had lost people in terms of death or sickness or whatever that might be. And in a lot of cases, those families would walk around with black armbands, which was actually an announcement to the larger culture that I have lost somebody. It is really hard. I may be very erratic or sensitive about things that are said to me or how I react to them. Please take it within that context, because that's what I'm living in right now. So the culture actually validated the loss that the person had experienced. And that same thing is true today. The only place really, the only place that we see it today is actually in professional sports. How often have you seen a team that either has, somebody's initials on the helmet or on the jersey or something that is indicative of the person that was a significant figure in the history of that club of whatever sort? Like in football, I grew up in Northwest Indiana in the shadow of Chicago. And for the longest time, and I think it still is true, that Chicago Bears, on their helmets, they have GSH, which is George S. Halas, the guy that actually founded the Chicago Bears football club. And we have that everywhere. So it seems like in professional sports, we don't have any problem recognizing and memorializing even the person that is now gone and absent. But in our general environment, in our general relationships with people, we don't have that as much. And so we hope that people will notice or remember. Actually, it's not so much notice, because we have different expectations of people that don't know anything at all versus people who do. But we hope that they will remember that I'm walking around without skin on. It is very hard. And there are days where I can kind of, quote unquote, forget that actually happened. It feels like a dream. It's not really real. And yet, we'll get reminded. And anniversaries do that for us. And anniversaries can include something like Father's Day or a birthday or Thanksgiving or Christmas or New Year's. Any of those are anniversaries or specific to the person, like wedding anniversaries. And so we hope that people will remember. We hope that they will validate even the immensity of what we have been through. But that is a big, big ask. Because the reality is people go on with their lives. They forget. It's not like they're trying to be forgetful or trying to be insensitive, but but they forget. They forget. And so it's hard to feel forgotten and no one sees me. Because the reality is I can be seen and forgotten. And that's sometimes how that feels. So even at this 5-month mark, which I've been talking about, no, well, we're not 5 months, 4-month mark, it feels that way. And we go on about life. We get distracted by a variety of things. So there are a variety of things that we are engaged in that we still have to engage in somehow, which is our relationships and our jobs and household responsibilities and being a parent and all the other things. That does not mean that is the gauge of our healing, just because I can carry on with life. People vary, actually, with how buttoned up they can be with whatever it is that they're feeling. People vary in that. And for me, just an inside baseball look, for me, it's a little bit of both. There are times I'm reminded and I kind of spiral down into the sorrow and the absence and the missing and looking at pictures and things like that. And those are an important part, actually, of this winter of our grief when people have gone through the kind of sorrow that people often go through in losing people. And it doesn't make sense to us to invite more sorrow. But in the process of inviting more sorrow, we re-engage the reality of that relationship, and we actually underscore the importance of that relationship by allowing ourselves a brief moment, and moment is not defined in terms of time, but a brief moment to remember and recall and feel some of the loss. I just had that. The friend that I had who had died back in March, we often would take annual trips together just for a week, just to get away and to talk about life and to unobstructedly, without the demands and responsibilities we each had in teaching college and students and everything else, we would just get away. And it always bumped up against Father's Day for both of us. We would always, oftentimes, whoever was in the other location would be heading back to celebrate Father's Day with their family. And that's what this moment in time was. I was reminded again of some of the things that we did. And so what did I do? I pulled up my photo album, and now we have thousands of photos in our photo album, and looked through some of the pictures that were taken during that last time that we were together. And it was inviting a healthy sorrow of the importance of that relationship in my life, and the things that we talked about, and the wandering and walking along the beach that we did, and a lot of things like that were sorrowfully good, if that makes sense. And that's very much been a part of how this whole thing goes. So the problem for most people that experience sorrow is that it is intangible, it is hidden, and it is invisible. And we feel it, they feel it all the time. It's always there. It's kind of a shadow in the background. And then it kind of comes to the forefront, and then it goes back again, and back and forth we go. And our challenge, I think, ultimately in dealing with that is, are we going to squash it with big T truth, what I call big T truth, which is either the reality from a Christian worldview, I will see them again. And that's true. That is true in the big T sense. In the small T sense, the unique feelings and thoughts and dreams and things that have been lost along the way are all also equally important. And the challenge is not to use our big T truth about they're out of pain and I will see them again and all those sorts of things, to squash the little t sadness and a melancholy, really, that goes along with just the absence of the person in our lives. And that's just normal. We don't have to get rid of it. We don't have to pathologize it. We don't have to do anything with it. We just have to live it. And by living it, we give it the credibility and the importance in our lives to shape the current relationships we already have. And those things are the kinds of things that are really so vitally important, because it changes over time. And in the book that I released in January, I talk about the seasons of our grief. And where I stand in this process is I am moving, I know that I am, I'm moving from the winter when everything feels dead and dark and gloomy and the sense of absence is just overwhelming, to the feelings starting to wake up. And that's the spring of our grief, where we feel that way. And we have to, our challenge is to move into it, not away from it, by denying it or minimizing it or diluting it or anything else like that. And that's easier said than done. I understand that. But at the same time, it is us engaging the important part of our own growth and recovery, even from the loss that we've experienced, and that doesn't happen automatically. Now, let me drag it into the physical realm, because I have an appointment tomorrow with my personal therapist, otherwise known as a physical therapist, and I go in there and I've done, dutifully done the stretching that I'm supposed to do and all the other things that I do. And I go in, and then we go through a whole regimen of a variety of exercises that they take me through to see where my flexibility is and what my mobility is like and where the pains, kind of triggers and things like that. And that tells them what other work I may or may not have to do. That same process is also called the grieving process. That's one of the reasons why we refer to it as grief work. Because it is work. I have to intentionally move into doing something that I don't want to do, for one, and for another, I don't actually think I should have to do, that it will just naturally take care of itself. But there is an illusion and even an urban myth that runs around in our language that again, kind of is a pet peeve of mine. And when somebody says, time heals all wounds, time does nothing to our wounds. It's what we do with time that does. And that's entirely up to us, what we're going to do with the time that we've been given and what we're going to press into to allow us to experience the full healing, which means that the gap that they left behind in our lives is still filled, but it is filled with memories and all the other things that we have kind of allowed ourselves to move through fluidly and dynamically, and allowed those to become part of the new fabric of our lives in that particular area of our lives. So it's an important aspect that I think to keep in mind with this process of life and living. Like I said, the subtext is sorrow, not to make life burdensome and awful, and it's just always sorrow. No, it's not. But our lives alternate joy and sorrow, and each one gains significance by its contrast. If we try to rid our lives of the contrast, then it will become really very featureless and dare I say it, even dull. Because joy all the time, before too long, gets dull. Because it has no features to it. It's always the same way with sorrow. If it's all sorrow in the world that I live in, it will, a lot of people will point to depression and things like that. It just kind of grinds down to the tyranny and monotony of sameness that oftentimes makes it so hard to keep moving on in the emotional realm. So the thing to keep in mind is the last thing I want to mention is, even in Scripture, when we look at how God handles loss, and it is always honored, it is always recognized. And you can choose the books in the Bible that you might be most familiar with. Maybe it's the Gospels. And Jesus was very, very intentional about people that experienced loss and the pain that they experience as being human. And we can do no less. We really can do no less. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. So a few random thoughts to get us out of the gate and get us started back again with the podcast itself and Unscripted. The Outpost podcast will be doing a rerun of sorts of an old talk that I did. Good grief, it would have been 2 Decembers ago, called The Comfort of Shame. And it will be showing up before the week is out, and you'll have an opportunity to listen to that as well. It's called the Outpost podcast. And if some of what I'm talking about strikes a chord and begins to make some sense, then find out more about what I'm doing and what the Stained Glass International community is doing at sgi-net.org. That's the home for the SGI community and the groups of people that are gathering there to talk about such issues of grief and life and living and relationships and boundaries and all sorts of things. And Lord willing, before the summer is out, we will have an e-course that will be talking far more in depth about shame and grace and our ability to live life fully free and understanding that grace isn't just for our salvation, it is also for our living as well. So there are a variety of resources on the website, whether that's a digital devotional about healthy relationships, whether that's the other podcasts. You can listen in on past episodes of The Outpost. It used to be called the Psych Monologues. Now we renamed it and labeled it under the Outpost podcast. And so check that out at sgi-net.org. You can follow us on any of the social media, including Instagram, at SGI_international, and Facebook, ray.mitch, or Facebook. Stained Glass International, or LinkedIn at DR Mitch. You can find us in any of those places and subscribe and hit the subscribe button and the approval button or whatever, like button, to be able to help us get more people involved and help people find out what it is we're talking about there. There's a variety of resources. I just refer you to check it out. There's a SGI store. You can buy both of my books there, the Grieving the Loss of Someone You Love, and then also the Seasons of Our Grief. You can get those there as well as being part of our online community. When you hit the website for the very first time, you'll get invited to sign up to be part of the community. It's not going to be any cost to you. We will be sending out email newsletters to let you know what's coming up and things of that sort every month or so. It's a big or so. So check it out. If you want to support us, none of this can be done without the financial support of people that are committed to what we're trying to accomplish here at SGI. And so you can make a donation on the donation page at sgi-net.org, or if you prefer to send us a physical check, you can do that as well. Just send it to, or address it to SGI. And then it's P.O. Box 322, East Lake, Colorado, 80614. So I think that's it. Thanks so much for joining me while I get back on the grid here. And I hope to see you next time. And until then, love ya. Later. Bye.